is chiefly from celebrity studies. Understanding how celebrity studies has changed as our idea of celebrity has changed from sort of film stars, Hollywood actors to YouTubers and Instagram influencers. Being publicly famed isn't always pretty. It's kind of taking the worst of both traditional celebrity culture and micro celebrity, but hopefully in this talk, I'll give you a sense of what it's like to go through this and also how to survive this. All right, so the main interventions that I'm making in this work, one, I hope that you understand that people who are non-consensually famed are worthy of academic study, even though they currently are not. The main theoretical point I'm doing is Anne Gerslev writes about temporalities of celebrity, of understanding celebrity through different time models. And I'm going to expand her theory and to allow a crash, sort of violent interactions between these. I'll then use the sort of crash temporality framework to understand my own experiences and sort of in an autoethnographic framework. And finally, I propose this method of radical reciprocity, which is a way that you can reclaim agency despite sort of this violent crashing of temporalities. So, okay, the first one is, why should we even care about the situation? So most of you are probably familiar with public shaming. In the old days, it was, since the public sphere was in a public place, like physical location, you would see public shaming in the form of physical punishments, right? So you have the pillory here, where the state sort of enforces transgressions by putting demarcating someone as like worthy of shame, saying what they have done wrong and saying that this is bad behavior. As the public sphere has moved from physical spaces to digital spaces, we still see the sort of negotiation of what societal norms should be, but rather than the state enacting violence onto someone, it is about a more sort of distributed thing. It's online, and it's unclear which norms should be shamed or not. So, for example, Bean Dad back in January 2021 puts a comment out, and it's sort of a lot of Twitter users come onto him and say that like, hey, this is like not cool. Try to highlight sort of the transgression that he does. There's also sort of a backlash to this as people try to push against these norms being enforced onto it. So, for example, Ken Jennings defending Bean Dad, but then also getting dragged into the controversy as well. So public shaming is becoming more common, especially as the public sphere has been expanded to this online spaces, but there's also sort of this recognition that maybe this forms of public shaming should not be used. So for example, Monica Lewinsky has been very public about kind of the aftermath of what it was like to be in the Clinton scandal. And so more people are sort of recognizing, both for her case as well as Janet Jackson, that there might be some issue with how we are enforcing these transgressions. Okay, so that was a public shaming, but I'm talking about a public faming. What is that about? Does anybody recognize who this is? All right, this is Alex from Target. How is he famous? It's because this tweet happened where a teenage girl took a picture of him without his consent as he was bagging groceries in Target. This got extremely viral, like tens of thousands of likes and retweets, and like it seemed like a pretty good deal for Alex. You know, he went on Ellen, he got a lot of media attention, was able to pivot this somewhat, but also it kind of sucked as well. He was forced to change his home for a bit because he was receiving death threats. He had to lock down all of his accounts, but he didn't really do anything, right? All that happened was just this picture that was being taken. So unlike public shaming, where there is some idea that you're transgressing societal norms, Alex was publicly famed. He was celebrated because he fit teenage standards of beauty, but something about just getting this attention in the first place was inherently harmful. So looking at public faming cases is interesting because it allows you to extract sort of the shame part of it, the societal transgressions, from just casting a spotlight onto something is causing inherent damage. There's chat. Yes. Okay, so Andrea did recognize Alex from Target. So this is not sort of the only case that we see here. This happens, the same process of sort of sudden onset fame brief yet extremely public scrutiny and then significant personal backlash has been repeated sort of across the years. Whether it's Antoine Dodson being interviewed for a very traumatic event that happened, but getting memed for through song, whether it's Ken Bone literally just asking a question during the presidential debate, or Katie Bowman becoming the face of a project that she was sort of a team player on, but being used as a signpost for either sexism or people believing that sexism doesn't exist in academia. So it's not just sort of these one-off cases, no matter how like we might not know them, like how ephemeral it might be, it still has a large impact onto the person. And also this pattern just keeps repeating across the internet. So if we're going to analyze this theoretically, the question comes up is Alex from Target a celebrity? Traditional celebrity studies would say no. They distinguish celebrities from Alex from Target, say, by this term celetoids, social types who command media attention one day and are forgotten the other. In his book, Chris Rojek uses the people who put the flag up on Iwo Jima, right? When they came back from the war, these men got a ton of attention for being part of the signature photograph, but they didn't ask for this attention and were also unable to pivot this into any sort of lasting fame. However, the way that Chris Rojek describes these people is really kind of disdainful, right? He calls them people who have impudent ordinariness, as if like they're not worthy of study because they aren't able to turn this into a lasting sort of fame. Since 2001, this has sort of changed as celebrity studies scholars have understood celebrity instead of as a status, a state of being, to celebrification, a state where it's more of a process. Turner describes this as reality television becomes more popular in the shows like Big Brother, American Idol, where you take these ordinary people but transform them into something greater. Micro-celebrity studies has changed this even more. So when Turner is talking about it, he's talking about sort of mass media elevating the ordinary. But as internet celebrities have become more popular, this idea that you don't have to be famous to everyone, you can just be famous to a small number of people, recognizes that there are alternative forms of fame. And it's not just that you can ignore the ordinary or people. Most micro-celebrity studies research has focused on sort of this slow climb to recognition, whether it's through being an Instagram influencer, a Twitch star, a YouTube star, this idea that you're sort of building your audience and going from sort of an ordinary person to a celebrity, even among a small number of people. So it's recognizing that there's different ways to look at fame, but it's still not quite able to explain what's happened with Alex from Target. This matters, though, because the questions of where the private and public sphere intersect leads to a lot of questions. For example, in the legal space, as Kate Klonick and Thomas Kadri are sort of trying to understand how Facebook recognizes public figures and newsworthiness, in US law, public figure speech is regulated differently than a private person's. And as they say in their piece, it's hard to argue that Alex from Target, a global celebrity with hundreds of thousands of social media followers, is merely a private figure. Similarly, it is hard to argue that he is a voluntary public figure who thrust himself into the vortex of a public controversy by bagging groceries. If Facebook is going to be regulated on what speech is allowed and what's not, trying to understand how these celebrities cross both the public and private spheres is important to understand. On a personal level, it's also important just to recognize sort of the harms that are being done and whether it's retreading across existing social dynamics. So Crystal Abedin made a very good taxonomy of internet celebrities, and she focuses one category on eyewitness viral stars, where typically Black people are interviewed by the local news about some traumatic event, whether it's attempted assault or a fire in the housing complex. But when they talk about their pain, it's extracted from the situation and turned into a joke, right? Like, ain't nobody got time for that, or the bed intruder song. And she points out that this is a different class of internet celebrity because journalists are only interested in sort of this one moment rather than being invested in who they are as people. Being able to sort of gloss over sort of the trauma, especially of the Black experience, and turning it into just a joke. Journalists seldom take responsibility for the instant visibility of the overnight stars they have created. So taking into account Crystal Abden's call to action, I'm sort of interested in what public faming has in more than just people who are interviewed by your local news station into sort of a broader framework. All right. So that was explaining how I believe this area is worthy of study. And now I'm going to talk about my theoretical intervention that I'm doing with this. So Anne Gerslev is interested in trying to connect the traditional celebrity realms as well as the micro celebrity. So there's George Clooney, pretty famous movie star. There's ProZD, someone who's very famous to me, but you might not have heard of. He's a famous YouTuber. And if you look at the search terms graphs for George Clooney as ProZD, it's kind of what you expected, right? Even though ProZD is very famous in sort of gaming and anime spaces, the search traffic is nowhere near what George Clooney has. And what Gerslev says is responsible for this is that there's different cultures of interacting with the audience. For George Clooney and traditional celebrity culture, it's a temporality of scarcity. You intentionally have distance between you and your audience. No one really expects that if you write George Clooney, he'll actually see it. And he's also only releasing like a movie every couple of years. On the contrary, with micro celebrity, Gerslev says that this form of celebrity requires nowness of plenty of constant updates. And you can even see this on how ProZD updates his channel, right? He's opening fans' PO box letters. He's doing very silly things, and you sort of expect him to upload once every day or like every couple of days. And it's a very different form of interacting with the audience and how the audience expects to interact with the person. In Gerslev's paper, she focuses on this British fashion YouTuber named Zoella, and looks at how Zoella sort of negotiates between these two cultures. Even though she became famous on YouTube, she started to become well-known enough that she was able to be on movies, on magazine covers, and Gerslev describes this sort of negotiation between the two kinds of cultures. As Zoella became more famous in the traditional sense, some of her audience thought she started to become inauthentic, like wasn't really relating to their experiences. And so in response to that, she started engaging more on the YouTube side, continuing to post more updates and trying to cultivate that authentic, approachable self. So Gerslev is arguing that this is sort of a negotiation that happens between these two forms that both traditional celebrities and micro celebrities can go between. However, this doesn't quite, again, describe what happened in the publicly famed case. If we look at Ken Bone, for example, Ken Bone, unlike ProZD, actually at the time of when he answered the debate question, had a really sharp spike, like a sharp spike in activity that like overshadows whatever George Clooney has done. But it was only for that very brief instant. So in the publicly famed case, there's this tension between traditional celebrity and micro celebrity that can't be described by either of them. And the theoretical intervention that I'm proposing is one of a crash. Just like when you find yourself in a car crash, you have no control over whether it's going to happen. It's a very violent event. And then afterwards, you're just kind of left with, well, what do I do with this situation, right? Like, how do I pick up the pieces from where I've been left behind? So I'm going to take this sort of crash framework and expand it more using my own experiences. So as I've said, I was on Jeopardy, the trivia game show. As my final Jeopardy answer, I said, who is the spiciest Memelord? And you can sort of see the same sharp spike here, right? In the search traffic for Memelord, you can exactly see when my episode was. So I'm interested in using this crash framework rather than one of negotiation to sort of understand my situation and understand how to go beyond that. This isn't a traditional autoethnography because I didn't know that this was going to happen coming into this. I was not able to sort of have my field site and have this in a repeatable way. But thanks to my media studies training in undergrad, I had a sufficient list of field notes that I could draw from, whether it's the episodes myself, my blog post, getting interviewed by the press, as well as a compiled list of comments and personal correspondence that I got when I was on the show. So Jeopardy is traditional media, right? It is a television show that's been on for over 35 years and has a very like standard way of doing things. It was very impressive going to sort of the set because everything was working like really smoothly. but they're not used to sort of this new forms of interacting with their audience, especially considering that most of Jeopardy's audience is in their 60s, right? But by saying the spiciest meme lord answer, I was kind of connecting these two cultures at once, of sort of bringing this old TV show into sort of the internet age and being caught in the middle of them. So without the crash, this is how Jeopardy sort of works. You get the call that you've auditioned several months in advance, and then you get the call that you've been selected for the show. Then there's probably several more months before you actually go onto the set. Jeopardy is filmed with 5 episodes per day, so you only have 5 minutes to sort of switch out between episodes, and it's a very compact filming process. Then once the episode is filmed, Jeopardy edits this and prepares advertising so that they can, if someone has a long streak, they can advertise that appropriately. During this time, you're not allowed to tell anyone about the results. You just have to sort of wait for several months between filming and then finally airing, when it's the sort of 1 episode a day pace that most people are used to. Notably, you're not really given any guidance about what to do during this several months waiting period, other than don't talk to the press about what happened in the games. So I'm not a big corporation. I'm not used to working in this sort of scarcity, like very slow time span where, 5 episodes a day is expanded into sort of a week of filming, right? So in my blog post at the time, I was literally saying that I don't have memories of what has happened in the filming process. I just couldn't remember like what the questions were asked, like the entire process, because I was just trying to sort of survive in this kind of environment. And then it became that the only memories that I could rely on was what I saw on TV itself. In my personal journey, so October 2016 was when I was called for auditions, and then I got the call in December 2016. And then this whole 2-week part of the competition only took place among 2 days. The spiciest Memelord answer was a few minutes in it, and that was my experience on the Jeopardy set. I only got to spend 2 days on there. But what's interesting is that by giving this final Jeopardy answer of who is the spiciest Memelord, I have forced sort of within TV's temporality of scarcity, I've forced this micro celebrity temporal logic, this idea of like, oh, the internet is here, it's on Jeopardy, and now that they're going to have to deal with it, I put this crash even though I didn't realize that's what I was doing. So Jeopardy is ecstatic that I did this, right? Since they're used to sort of this traditional temporality of scarcity and traditional celebrity culture, they know how to work press releases, they know how to get books, they know how to talk to the news sources. But by having the spiciest Memelord answer, this now lets them access the temporality of nowness, of plenty, and engage with the youths, right? The 18 to 35 age demographic is very profitable. And so by putting the spiciest Memelord down, they were able to make to try to attempt to reach this audience, like from this Snapchat filter to this Instagram ad that they advertised. Jeopardy was not the only place to enjoy this new access to this temporality that they normally don't. So for my university, MIT, I got called out on graduation by the university president of like, haha, like MIT Jeopardy, and also for the admissions office. So the sort of advertising, the admissions office, which is both sort of advertising for MIT, but also trying to select students. My Jeopardy answer was very effective for them to sort of advertise to both. So that's how traditional institutions work. They finally got access to this demographic that they don't usually do. But what happened to me, right? On the one hand, after filming, I was completely exhausted, right? Having to be sort of on for television, like being extremely extroverted, like I just went back home and I slept. On the other side, immediately after filming, one of the other contestants was like, oh, you're gonna get so many points on BuzzFeed. And I literally had not thought about that. I was just thinking of like, oh, like my friends at home will be interested in this, and had forgotten that, you know, maybe a lot other people are going to think about going to recognize the shout out that I did. So when these two things combined, in the waiting period that I had until the episodes came out, I was just have this resignation, right? I just want the episode to air and get my 15 minutes of fame over with. The suspense of knowing that I'm going to be a national figure and famous on the internet and probably doxxed in some fashion is kind of nerve-wracking. So in the paper, the way I describe it is that individually, each of these two modes of celebrity were hard to manage as one person, but the crash of the two made the task nearly impossible. Unlike Zoella, who was able to, she controls both how she's represented in traditional culture as well as in her YouTube channel, I had no control of both. On the one hand, traditional celebrity culture gives this air of exclusive access, right? You have press interviews, you have like, official glossy pictures taken, but it's relying on this to survive in that sort of atmosphere. You need to be able to maintain distance from the public, right? Like Zoella, when she's on the cover of Cosmo, you're not going to be able to access her. It's being broadcast to you. For micro celebrities, though, it's this air of approachable authenticity. The idea that, oh, I'm just like you, like just being a normal person doing normal things. But in order to cultivate that air of authenticity, you need to be able to pick and choose what to promote. So the crash between these two ideas inherently sets up a tension. I can't maintain the distance needed to survive these sort of press cycles because I'm also a micro celebrity, that like the whole point of the micro celebrity is that you can approach me. Similarly, right, like I can't maintain exclusive access while also trying to say that I'm like a normal, ordinary person. So while the large institutions had sort of their press offices that could sort between this and pick which parts of me that they wanted, I did not have the same luxury. It's also interesting in seeing the ways that my image was being used, both by Jeopardy as well as people on the internet. So on the left, you can see the meme that Jeopardy photoshopped onto me with the deal with it sunglasses, the text all around it, the impact font. Meanwhile, on the right, there is, this comes from r/Photoshop battle, where you can upload a picture and then people sort of Photoshop whatever they want to. Both of these are sort of like treating me as an image, as a media object that can be manipulated as they see fit, right? I obviously putting fake sunglasses on me is nothing compared to being, virtually sexually assaulted by Joe Biden and John Travolta, but I don't have sort of agency of either of these images, and they exist online, and people can just play with me as they will, right? And it's interesting to see sort of, again, when Jeopardy is trying to access these micro celebrity forms of temporality, they're actually echoing some of what's happening on the internet as well. This idea of becoming a blank slate, this idea that you could manipulate me because I'm now ascended to a media object, was sort of repeated across many different axes. So on this slide on the left, you see people saying, wow, like an all Asian Jeopardy final, this is like immigrants get the job done. This is exactly what our country needs, right? This very sort of liberal interpretation of casting their politics onto me. And on the right, you see screenshots from r/the Donald, where people, because I was using memes in a mainstream context, were convinced that I was a Trump supporter, that by forcing these two realms to collide, like only people who supported Trump would know how to sort of play with this medium. Politics was not the only thing that people cast onto me. I also became like a blank slate for people's gender anxieties. So this is just one of many threads who are very confused about what my gender is, thinking that I'm a boy or a girl, and really dissecting like how my voice looks, how my hair looks, all these little things, trying to pick out what gender I am. During this time, I found there was this disabled trans game designer called Porpentine, who also sort of describes his experiences. And those were kinds of the words that I found solace in, this idea of I was sort of an object that could be infinitely manipulated and extruded. Anyone could put whatever political or racial or gender tensions onto me. And like nobody is expecting me to actually read these comments, but they're there and I am reading them. So that was what people think of just sort of commenting out of the blue, but with the approachability that comes from micro celebrity, people were like, oh, I can actually talk to Lilly. So I started getting messages in both my Facebook Messenger, my email, pretty much anything that I had an account for. And the range of the things really spanned, from, hey, who do you think's the best programmer, to give me money, to you suck, right? Uh, and it's actually interesting because I might have received less harassment because people were so confused about how I presented gender-wise. This is a known problem that now when you're on Jeopardy, you actually get a lot of harassment, especially if you're read as a woman. So this was written by former contestants about a year before I was actually on the show, just talking about just the range of harassment that women receive on this show. At the time, Jeopardy had no media training to prepare you for this. I only learned that I should be protecting my accounts when I joined sort of the unofficial alumni network. Now Jeopardy gives people a heads up that they might experience social media harassment, but there's still nothing like any PR training, any media training that you will get this. So it's strange, right? Because at the time I was just transitioning from senior year to my first year of graduate school. And so I wanted to be known as sort of this PhD student, as a roboticist, as people excited about my research. But instead, I was getting all of these other labels sort of put onto me, whether it was being a meme lord or cringy or, a Trump supporter. And because I'm me, I'm an individual, I'm not a corporation, I can't just jettison aspects of of myself, right? If the company is doing well, you run the PR campaign and say, we have sacked the CEO, we're going to do another direction, right? I can't sack the cringe part of me, that doesn't make sense, And so I'm getting all of these labels put onto me because of the stories that people want to hear, whether it's MIT and Sony Pictures wanting to have a very specific image that helps their brand, or whether it's just random internet commenters who are looking at me as a symbol, as a media object that they can put whatever political ideas that they have. And so it's also because it's not like a pure negative experience, right? I did win Jeopardy and I did get money from that. And my advisor is introducing me to people as, oh, this is the Jeopardy champion. And I'm getting access to these exclusive conferences or speaking engagements. So it's also unclear whether how much I want to jettison this, right? It's all because I'm an individual and not sort of a conglomerate of things. So, okay, this kind of sucks as an experience, but is there any way that I can reclaim my agency and sort of try to set my own narrative of who I am? And that's sort of the final part of this paper, which I'm talking about radical reciprocity. I got inspired to look more deeply into what radical reciprocity is by a previous Jeopardy contestant, Nikki Peters. She was on the college championship the year before me. And when she saw that she was getting so much hate on Twitter, she made an account just to retweet all of the haters on there. And I was like, oh, that seems like a pretty good idea. It seems very funny, but I don't really know what's going on here. There's also this paper that's in the same special issue that I am, which is talking about how victims of sexual assault sort of reclaim their agency. And I highly recommend checking out this paper by Signe Oldberg. And the way that she frames what I'm going to talk about as radical reciprocity is contra shaming, which sort of, shaming the shamers. There's something going on here. So highly recommend checking out this paper as well. All right. So how I define radical reciprocity is that is basically trying to understand how you're being attacked and to reverse those back onto the people attacking you. So first, it's to understand how you are being famed, those faming actions. So there's a spotlight being cast onto me. I recognize what affordances those platforms have to offer, and then I pull out my Uno reverse card and I cast the spotlight back onto the famers. I reverse what affordances the platform gives me and sort of forces people to do the same, to experience what I have and recognize why this is kind of a cruddy experience. So in this paper, I was talking a lot about these two different temporalities, a temporality of scarcity for traditional culture and a temporality of nowness. The traditional culture is this broadcast media exemplified by Hollywood, whereas these other temporalities, the micro-celebrity one is of the internet. And so both of these media platforms have different affordances that can then be reversed. For the temporality of scarcity, to reverse those affordances means to sort of accept the fact that you've been famed and you pretend that like you are famous and that people should listen to you just because you are famous. So in this case, the two big things that I was trying to fight against was Sony Pictures, how Jeopardy was using my image, and also how MIT was using my image. For Sony Pictures, I pull out my Uno card, and honestly, this presentation, this paper is part of how I'm trying to reclaim my narrative, not just this idea that like, haha, she's a college student, like saying funny memes, but that no, like the Jeopardy experience wasn't universally positive. And like, we need to talk about these aspects, especially if we're going to protect future contestants from dealing with quite a lot of sexual harassment. For MIT, the way that I sort of reversed this was by being more vocal about things that I felt that were wrong with the institution. I'm decently famous on campus as the Jeopardy person, and I use my platform as like a big woman on campus to be like, hey, you know, maybe we shouldn't take dirty money from Jeffrey Epstein. So this method of reverse reciprocity of radical reciprocity is nice because like I'm now able to sort of reclaim some agency, describe what I'm going through and not just have a story forced onto me. But it does come with some pitfalls, one of which is I am a small person against large entities, and I'm not actually that famous, right? Like nobody is going to necessarily listen to me, even if I pretend that I do have a platform and I should accept it. The other pitfall that comes from this is it requires you to legitimize these faming efforts, right? Saying that I am famous and I have a platform and you should listen to me means that the fame that I got through Jeopardy, through MIT is legitimate, and I'm legitimizing those structures by sort of accepting this. All right. For the other temporality, the temporality of plenty, the main thing that I was trying to fight against was these sort of internet comments, both the ones that were sort of indirectly just talking about me as an appearance, or the ones that were directly trying to contact me. So for the random comments on the internet, the Uno reverse card that I actually do is the same sort of compilation process that Nikki was doing. This is also how I was able to get so many comments for this presentation, is that when I was going through this process, I was saving all of the things that I had. And this works because, you know, nobody's expecting, Twitter is not expecting you to use a Twitter to just only reblog things that people hate about you, right? Like that's not really the use case that they're thinking about. But by putting everything into a newsfeed format of like looking at all of the comments, you start to see patterns in it and it becomes ridiculous. Like the pettiness that's involved in there just allows you to sort of distance yourself from the situation and make it funny. For more direct attacks, the way that I reversed the affordances of what Facebook had was to make the other person realize that they're just as accessible as me, is that if they could access my account, I could access their account just as easily and give them a taste of that. So I was repeatedly sexually harassed by this guy, and it got to the point where he started sending me dick pics. So rather than blocking him, I instead used this method of going through his Facebook friends, finding what looked like friends and family and being like, hello, do you know that your friend is doing this? None of them believed me. They were like, oh, he must have gotten hacked or something like that. But it ended up working out because the guy ended up blocking me, probably so that he could say like, oh, I don't know who this person is. So I clearly can't find them on my account. So yeah, that worked in the moment and it was able to sort of reclaim some agency in that way. But it's also a little dicey because this is kind of coming back to the public shaming concerns, right? Essentially, even though I wasn't publicly shaming him to a large audience, I was kind of shaming him to the people that mattered to him, right? And same thing with the reblogging all of the bad comments that you get. It's unclear whether that is just sort of retreading the same toxic patterns that the platform already allows, and whether that should be allowed or not, or is a viable method. But at least in the moment, for something that is so identity defining, even just like small amounts of ways that I could put my own story and narrative out there were very beneficial for me. All right, so that sort of concludes my talk. Hopefully I've convinced you that people who get their 15 seconds of fame are worthy of academic study. I introduced an expansion of Anne Gerslev's framework into being able to handle these interesting cases of being famed. I talked about my own experiences and how the crash framework helps me unpack what went on with me. And finally, I proposed this idea of radical reciprocity, of a way to sort of fight back against these forces. So thank you for coming.